The dust devils swirled outside the window like harbingers of trouble, and Lena Zimmerman watched them with a sinking feeling in her chest as three riders approached her ranch in the late afternoon heat of July 1878. She had been expecting them, had known they would come eventually, but that did not make the sight of them any easier to bear. Her father had been dead only 3 months, buried in the hard Texas soil behind the house he had built with his own hands, and already the vultures were circling. Brownsville, Texas had never been kind to women who tried to stand on their own, and Lena was discovering just how unkind it could be. The land stretched out in all directions around her small ranch, scrubland dotted with mesquite trees and the occasional cluster of prickly pear cactus, beautiful in its own harsh way. Her father had loved this land, had worked himself to the bone to make something of it, and now that he was gone, there were men who thought it should belong to them instead. She set down the mending she'd been working on and stood, smoothing her calico dress and squaring her shoulders. At 22, she was young to be alone in the world, but she had never been the type to crumble at the first sign of adversity. Her father had raised her to be strong, to ride and rope and shoot as well as any man, though he had also taught her the value of education and refinement. She could quote Shakespeare as easily as she could brand a calf, and she was proud of that duality. The 3 men dismounted outside, and Lena recognized them immediately. Harrison Webb, the banker from town, dressed in his usual stuffy suit despite the sweltering heat. Beside him was Samuel Porter, a rancher whose land bordered hers to the north, a man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. The third was a lawyer named Edmund Cross, who had set up practice in Brownsville the year before and had quickly made a name for himself as someone willing to bend the law to suit whoever paid him the most. Lena did not wait for them to knock. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, her chin held high. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel sweat beginning to trickle down her spine, but she refused to show any weakness. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "I assume you are here about my answer to your previous offer." Harrison Webb removed his hat, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Miss Zimmerman, we hoped you might have reconsidered. The offer we made was more than generous." "Generous," Lena repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "You offered me less than half what this land is worth, and you know it." Samuel Porter spat into the dust, his eyes narrowing. "Your pa might have worked this land, girl, but that does not mean you can. A woman has no business trying to run a ranch on her own. It is not proper, and it is not right." "What is not right is you trying to steal what belongs to me," Lena shot back, her green eyes flashing. "My father left this land to me in his will. It was properly recorded and witnessed. You have no claim to it." Edmund Cross stepped forward, a thin smile on his face that did not reach his eyes. "Actually, Miss Zimmerman, that is where you are mistaken. We have been looking into your father's will, and there are some irregularities that call into question its validity." "That is a lie," Lena said, her heart beginning to pound. "My father made his will with Judge Morrison. Everything was done properly." "Judge Morrison is dead," Cross said smoothly. "He passed away last month, as you may recall, and unfortunately, some of the documentation related to various wills he oversaw has gone missing. Without proper documentation, the court may have no choice but to declare your inheritance invalid." Lena felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "You stole the documents," she whispered. "That is a serious accusation," Webb said, shaking his head. "We are simply trying to help you, Miss Zimmerman. A young woman alone is vulnerable. There are dangers you cannot anticipate. If you were to sell the land to Mr. Porter here, you would have enough money to move back east, to find a husband, to live a proper life." "This is my proper life," Lena said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "This is my home, and I will not be driven from it by lies and theft." Samuel Porter took a step toward her, and there was something menacing in his posture. "You are making a mistake, girl. We are trying to be civilized about this, but there are other ways to handle the situation. A woman alone can meet with all sorts of accidents." The threat hung in the air between them, as palpable as the oppressive heat. Lena felt fear curl in her stomach, but she refused to back down. "Get off my land," she said. "Now." For a moment she thought they might refuse, might push their way into her house or worse, but then Webb replaced his hat and gestured to the others. "We will give you 1 more week to think about our offer, Miss Zimmerman. After that we will have no choice but to proceed with legal action, and I assure you the courts will not look kindly on a woman who refuses to be reasonable." They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Lena standing alone on her porch, trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. She knew they meant every word of their threats, both legal and physical. She had heard stories of other women who had tried to hold on to property after their fathers or husbands died, women who had been run off their land or worse. Brownsville was growing, and men like Samuel Porter saw opportunity in that growth, opportunity that did not include women who refused to know their place. She went back inside and sank into her father's old chair, pressing her hands to her face. She had a few ranch hands who worked for her, good men who had been loyal to her father, but they were old and would be no match for hired guns if Porter decided to take that route. She had some money saved, but not enough to wage a lengthy legal battle, especially not against men who were willing to bribe judges and forge documents. For the first time since her father's death, Lena felt truly alone. The next morning, she rode into town to speak with the few people she thought might help her. The sun was barely up, but already the heat was building, promising another scorching day. Brownsville was a modest town, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the Rio Grande, with dusty streets and boardwalks that were always in need of repair. It had grown considerably in the years since the war, attracting ranchers and farmers and the usual assortment of merchants and service providers that followed where there was money to be made. Lena's first stop was the marshal's office. Marshal Dawson was a grizzled man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Brownsville for the better part of a decade. She found him sitting at his desk, going through a stack of wanted posters. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, rising when she entered. "What can I do for you?" Lena explained the situation, telling him about the threats Samuel Porter had made and the missing documents. Dawson listened, his expression growing more uncomfortable as she spoke. "That is a serious matter," he said when she finished. "But Miss Zimmerman, if we are talking about legal documents and wills, that is not really a matter for the marshal. That is for the courts to sort out." "He threatened me," Lena said. "He said I could meet with an accident. Surely that is something you can act on." Dawson sighed, rubbing his jaw. "The problem is, he did not actually do anything. If he were to take action against you, of course I would investigate, but I cannot arrest a man for words." "So I am supposed to wait until he actually tries to harm me?" Lena asked, incredulous. "I will keep an eye on the situation," Dawson promised, but there was something in his tone that told Lena he would do no such thing. Samuel Porter was a wealthy man, and wealth bought influence, even with the law. Frustrated, Lena left the marshal's office and made her way to the newspaper. The Brownsville Gazette was run by a man named Arthur McCallum, a transplant from Pennsylvania, who had brought his printing press west in search of adventure and profit. She had met him a few times and had always found him to be fair-minded and sympathetic to the plight of the less powerful. The office smelled of ink and paper, and McCallum looked up from his typesetting when she entered, his ink-stained fingers pausing in their work. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is unexpected. What brings you here?" Once again, Lena explained her situation, and this time her audience was more receptive. McCallum listened intently, his brow furrowing as she described the threats and the missing documents. "That is quite a story," he said when she finished. "And you are saying you have proof that your father's will was properly executed?" "I have my copy of the will," Lena said, "and there were witnesses. But Mr. Cross claims the official records are missing." McCallum drummed his fingers on his desk, thinking. "I could write a story about this, bring it to the public's attention. Sometimes the light of scrutiny is enough to make men think twice about their actions." Hope flared in Lena's chest. "Would you?" "I would," McCallum said. "But I have to be honest with you, Miss Zimmerman. Samuel Porter advertises in my paper. So does the bank. If I write a story that paints them in a negative light, they may pull their advertising, and that would hurt me financially. I am willing to take that risk, but I want you to understand that writing a story may not be enough. These men have resources and influence. They will fight back." "I understand," Lena said. "But I have to try. I cannot just let them take everything my father worked for." McCallum nodded. "Give me a day to put the story together. I will talk to some people, see if I can verify any of what you have told me. The next edition comes out in 3 days." Lena thanked him and left, feeling slightly better but still uncertain. 3 days seemed like a long time, and she wondered what Porter and his associates might do in the meantime. She had one more stop to make in town. The general store was owned by Margaret Sullivan, a widow who had been a friend of her mother's before she passed away when Lena was just a girl. Margaret was a shrewd businesswoman who had managed to hold on to her store despite the same sort of pressure that Lena was now facing. The store was busy with mid-morning customers when Lena arrived, but Margaret caught her eye and gestured for her to wait. When there was finally a lull, Margaret came over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lena, dear, you look troubled. What is wrong?" Lena kept her voice low as she explained, not wanting the other customers to overhear. Margaret's expression grew darker as she listened. I wish I could say I was surprised," Margaret said, "but I am not. They tried the same thing with me after my Henry died. Told me a woman had no business running a store, that I should sell and let a man take over. I refused, and they made things difficult for me for a while. Suppliers would not deliver, customers were warned away. But I am stubborn, and I outlasted them." "How?" Lena asked. "How did you manage it?" "I had something they wanted," Margaret said. "My store is in a prime location, right on Main Street. They thought if they squeezed me hard enough, I would sell for a pittance. But I held on, and eventually they realized I was not going anywhere. Then it became more profitable to do business with me than to fight me." "I do not know if I have that option," Lena said. "They want my land, and they are willing to steal the documents that prove it is mine." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You need someone to stand with you. Someone who cannot be bullied or bought. Do you have anyone like that?" Lena shook her head. "The ranch hands are loyal, but they are old men. They could not stand up to hired guns." "Then you need to find someone who can," Margaret said. "There must be someone." Lena rode back to her ranch feeling more discouraged than ever. The sun was high in the sky now, beating down without mercy, and she could feel her blouse sticking to her skin beneath her riding jacket. The land stretched out around her, harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful in its own way. She loved this place, loved the way the sunset turned the sky into a canvas of orange and purple, loved the sound of the cattle lowing in the evening, loved the sense of accomplishment that came from a hard day's work. The thought of losing it, of being forced to give it up simply because she was a woman, filled her with a rage so intense it made her hands shake on the reins. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost did not notice the lone rider approaching from the east. He was moving at an easy pace, sitting his horse like a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. As he drew closer, Lena reined in her own mount and watched him approach, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle she kept in a scabbard attached to her saddle. The rider saw the movement and held up both hands in a gesture of peace. "No need for that, madam," he called out. "I'm not looking for trouble." He was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat and eyes that were a startling shade of blue even at a distance. He was dressed like a working cowboy, with chaps over his denim pants and a vest over his chambray shirt. There was a gun on his hip, worn in the easy way of someone who knew how to use it, and his face was tanned from long hours in the sun. "Then what are you looking for?" Lena asked, not moving her hand from the rifle. "Work, if you have any," the man said. He was close enough now that she could see his face clearly, could see the honest set of his jaw and the way his eyes met hers directly. "Name is Thomas Tanner. I have been riding through looking for ranch work, and I heard in town that you might be hiring." "You heard wrong," Lena said. "I have all the hands I need." That was not entirely true, but she was not about to take on a stranger, especially not now when she could not be sure who to trust. Thomas Tanner studied her for a moment, then glanced around at the land. "Seems like a good spread," he said. "A lot of work for just a few hands, though. And I heard in town that you might be having some trouble." Lena stiffened. "What did you hear?" "Just talk," Thomas said carefully. "Something about men trying to take your land, something about a woman alone being easy to push around." "And I suppose you think you can help with that," Lena said, her voice sharp with suspicion. Thomas shrugged. "I know how men like that operate. I have seen it before. They count on people being scared, being isolated. They do not expect anyone to stand up to them." "And you think you can stand up to them?" Lena said. I think I can try," Thomas said. "Look, I am not asking for anything special, just a job and a place to sleep. If your trouble blows over, I will work your cattle same as any other hand. If it does not, well, I have been in tight spots before." There was something in his manner that made Lena want to trust him, but she had been taught to be cautious. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Montana, originally," Thomas said. "Been working ranches here and there for the past few years. Last place I worked was up near San Antonio, but the owner died, and his son sold the place out from under us. Been drifting since then, looking for something steady. Why should I trust you? Lena asked bluntly. Thomas met her eyes, and there was no guile in his expression, just a simple honesty that was increasingly rare. I guess you should not yet. But I am willing to earn your trust. Try me for a few days. If I do not work out, I will move on. No hard feelings. Lena considered. She did need help, that much was true. The ranch was small, but still too much for just her and the two old-timers who worked for her now. And there was something about this Thomas Tanner that she liked, though she could not quite put her finger on what it was. Perhaps it was simply the fact that he treated her like a person, like someone capable of making her own decisions rather than a helpless woman who needed to be managed. $30 a month plus room and board, she said finally. You will bunk with the other hands, and you will work. I do not tolerate laziness or drinking on the job. A smile broke across Thomas's face, transforming it from merely handsome to something altogether more appealing. Yes, madam, you will not regret this. I had better not, Lena said, but she found herself smiling back despite herself. Come on, I will show you where you will be staying. They rode back to the ranch together, and Lena found herself stealing glances at her new hand. He sat his horse well, moving with the animal in a way that spoke of years of experience. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a firm chin, and there were lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though there was also a wariness there, as though he had seen trouble and was always prepared for more. The ranch house was small but well built, with a barn and a bunkhouse set a short distance away. The two other hands, Charlie and Fred, were both in their 60s and had worked for Lena's father for years. They looked up with curiosity as Lena and Thomas approached. Charlie, Fred, this is Thomas Tanner, Lena said. He will be working with us for a while. Thomas, these are the men who keep this place running. Charlie, who was missing most of his teeth and had a perpetual squint from years in the sun, spat tobacco juice and nodded. Another hand, eh? About time. We have been working ourselves ragged. Fred, slightly younger and less grizzled but still clearly past his prime, offered his hand to Thomas. Welcome. Hope you do not mind hard work because there's plenty of it. I am counting on it, Thomas said, shaking Fred's hand firmly. Lena left Thomas to get settled in the bunkhouse and went back to the main house. She had chores to do, animals to feed, and 100 other tasks that filled her days. But even as she worked, she found her thoughts drifting back to the new hand, to the way his eyes had met hers with such directness, to the confidence in his voice when he said he had been in tight spots before. She told herself she was being foolish, that he was just a hired hand and nothing more. But there had been something in his smile that had made her heart beat a little faster, and she could not quite shake the feeling that his arrival might change things in ways she had not anticipated. That evening, after the day's work was done, Lena prepared dinner for herself and brought some stew out to the bunkhouse for the hands. It was something her father had always done, making sure the men were fed properly, and she had continued the tradition. Thomas was sitting outside the bunkhouse when she approached, cleaning his saddle in the fading light. He looked up and got to his feet immediately. Miss Zimmerman, he said, that smells wonderful. It is just stew, Lena said, setting the pot down. Nothing fancy. There are bowls inside. I am sure it is better than anything I would have made for myself, Thomas said. He hesitated, then added, Would you mind if I asked you something? I suppose that depends on what you want to ask, Lena said. The men who are trying to take your land, Thomas said. How serious are they? I mean, are we talking about legal pressure, or are they the type to take more direct action? Lena appreciated that he had not tried to dance around the subject. I think they will try the legal route first, she said. But Samuel Porter, the rancher who wants my land, he made it clear that there could be accidents if I do not cooperate. So yes, I think they might be willing to use violence if they think they can get away with it. Thomas nodded slowly, his expression serious. Then you need to be careful. A man like that will not stop just because you stand up to him. He will escalate. I know, Lena said quietly. But what choice do I have? This is my home. My father built this place from nothing. I cannot just walk away. I'm not saying you should, Thomas said. I'm just saying you need to be smart about how you fight back. Men like Porter, they count on intimidation. They expect people to fold at the first sign of real trouble. If you show them you are willing to fight, that you are not alone, sometimes that is enough to make them back off. And sometimes it is not, Lena said. And sometimes it is not, Thomas agreed. But you cannot live your life in fear of what might happen. You can only do what you think is right and hope it is enough. There was a conviction in his voice that made Lena study him more closely. You sound like you are speaking from experience. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. My father had a small ranch in Montana, he said finally. Nothing big, just enough to support our family. When I was 16, a mining company decided they wanted our land. They offered to buy us out, and when my father refused, they started making trouble. Poisoned our water, scattered our cattle, burned down our barn. My father tried to fight them, tried to get the law involved, but the mining company had more money and more influence. In the end, they hired men to come to our ranch and run us off. My father tried to stop them, and they shot him. Lena drew in a sharp breath. Thomas, I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, Thomas said, but there was pain in his eyes that suggested it was not nearly as long ago as he wanted it to be. My mother and my sisters went back east to live with relatives. I stayed out west. I guess I thought maybe I could find a place where justice still meant something, where a man could work hard and keep what was his. I'm still looking. Is that why you stopped here? Lena asked. Because you heard I was in trouble? Thomas met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just wanted to help someone who reminded me of my father, someone who was willing to fight for what was right even when the odds were against them. They stood there in the fading light, and Lena felt something shift between them, some understanding that went beyond words. This man was not just a hired hand. He was someone who understood what she was fighting for, who had lost something precious himself and knew the value of standing your ground. Thank you, she said softly, for stopping, for offering to help. Thank you for giving me the chance, Thomas said. I will not let you down. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Thomas proved to be everything he had promised, and more, working from sunup to sundown with a tireless energy that impressed even Charlie and Fred. He was good with horses, patient with the cattle, and seemed to have an instinct for the work that came from years of experience. But more than that, he was smart, always thinking ahead, always looking for ways to make things more efficient or more secure. On the third day after he arrived, he approached Lena while she was mending fence line on the eastern border of her property. I've been thinking about your security situation, he said without preamble. If Porter decides to make a move, he will probably do it at night. You should have someone watching the house and the barn after dark. Charlie and Fred are too old for that kind of thing, Lena said. I cannot ask them to stay up all night keeping watch. I will do it, Thomas said. I do not sleep much anyway. Lena looked at him sharply. You need your rest same as anyone. You cannot work all day and then stay up all night. I will be fine, Thomas insisted. We can take shifts if it makes you feel better, but you need someone alert and armed watching for trouble. He was right, and Lena knew it. She had been lying awake at night herself, jumping at every sound, imagining hired guns creeping up to the house. All right, she said, we will take shifts, but if you get too tired, you have to tell me. Deal, Thomas said with that easy smile of his. That night, Lena found herself sitting on her porch with Thomas, both of them armed and alert. The night was cooler than the day had been, with a breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. The stars were spectacular, a blanket of light spread across the sky in a way that never failed to take her breath away. It is beautiful out here, Thomas said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. Hard, but beautiful. My father always said that, Lena said. He said the land demanded respect, but gave back more than it took if you treated it right. Sounds like he was a wise man, Thomas said. He was, Lena said, her throat tightening with emotion. I miss him every day. They were quiet for a while, and then Thomas said, Tell me about him. What was he like? So Lena did. She told Thomas about her father, about how he had come to Texas with nothing but determination and a dream, about how he had worked himself nearly to death building the ranch. She told him about how he had insisted she learn to read and write, how he had saved money to buy her books, how he had never treated her like she was less capable simply because she was a woman. She talked until her voice grew hoarse, and Thomas listened without interrupting, his presence solid and comforting beside her. "He sounds like he was a good father," Thomas said when she finally fell silent. "He would be proud of you for fighting to keep what he built." "I hope so," Lena said. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being stubborn. If maybe it would be easier to just take their money and start over somewhere else." "Easier does not mean right," Thomas said. "And from what you have told me, they are not even offering you a fair price. They are trying to steal from you, pure and simple. You have every right to fight back." His words strengthened her resolve, reminded her why she was doing this. She glanced at him in the moonlight, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes reflected the starlight. He was handsome, she realized, though she had been too preoccupied with her troubles to really notice before. But it was more than that. There was a goodness in him, a decency that drew her like a magnet. "Why are you really here, Thomas?" she asked suddenly. "You could have ridden past. You could have found work somewhere less complicated." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly," he said finally, "I do not know. Maybe I was tired of riding past, tired of watching people get trampled because they could not stand up to bullies. Or maybe I just saw a beautiful woman who needed help and could not bring myself to keep riding." He said the last part lightly, almost jokingly, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he meant it. Lena felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. "You think I am beautiful?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas turned to look at her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart race. "I think you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said quietly. "But more than that, I think you are brave and strong, and exactly the kind of person worth fighting for." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, and Lena found herself leaning toward him without quite meaning to. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she was surprised by how much she wanted him to. But then Thomas pulled back, clearing his throat. "I am sorry," he said. "That was inappropriate. You are my employer, and I should not have spoken so freely." "Do not apologize," Lena said, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "I asked, and you answered honestly. I appreciate honesty." They sat together for the rest of the watch, but something had changed between them, some acknowledgement of an attraction that neither of them had been looking for, but neither could quite ignore. The next morning, the newspaper came out with Arthur McCallum's story. Lena rode into town early to pick up a copy, her heart pounding as she read the front page article. McCallum had done an excellent job, laying out the facts clearly and posing questions about the missing documents and the pressure being put on a young woman to give up her rightful inheritance. He stopped short of accusing anyone directly, but the implications were clear enough that anyone reading would understand what was happening. Lena was in the general store, showing the article to Margaret Sullivan, when Samuel Porter stormed in. His face was red with anger, and his eyes fixed on Lena with an intensity that made her take an instinctive step back. "You think you are clever, do you not?" he snarled, "running to the newspaper like some helpless little girl." "Well, let me tell you something, Missy. That article is not going to change anything. You are still going to lose that land, and now you have made an enemy of me." "You were already my enemy," Lena said, forcing herself to stand her ground despite the fear coursing through her. "And I am not helpless." "We will see about that," Porter said. He jabbed a finger toward her. "You have 1 week. 1 week to accept our offer. After that, things are going to get very unpleasant for you." He turned and stormed out, leaving Lena shaking. Margaret put a hand on her arm, steadying her. "You need to be careful," Margaret said. "He is dangerous when he is angry." "I know," Lena said, "but I cannot back down now." She rode back to the ranch with a sense of dread growing in her stomach. She had known that publishing the article would provoke Porter, but she had hoped it might also make him think twice about taking illegal action. Now she was not so sure. Thomas was waiting for her when she arrived, and one look at her face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked. Lena told him about the confrontation with Porter, about the renewed threats. Thomas's jaw tightened, and there was a hardness in his eyes that had not been there before. "Then we need to be ready," he said. "I will talk to Charlie and Fred, make sure everyone knows to keep their eyes open. And I think you should stay close to the house for the next few days, at least until we see how this plays out." "I will not be a prisoner on my own land," Lena protested. "I am not asking you to be a prisoner," Thomas said. "I am asking you to be smart. Porter is angry, and angry men do stupid things. Give him a few days to cool off, and in the meantime, we will make sure he knows you are protected." Lena wanted to argue, but she could see the concern in Thomas's eyes and knew he was right. "Fine," she said, "but I will not hide. I have work to do." "Then I will work with you," Thomas said. "Where you go, I go." Over the next few days, Thomas became her shadow. He worked beside her during the day, whether she was repairing fence, tending to the vegetable garden she kept behind the house, or checking on the small herd of cattle that grazed on her land. He was never intrusive, never made her feel like he was watching over her like a child, but his presence was constant and reassuring. They talked as they worked, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future. Lena learned that Thomas had a sister back east who was married to a shopkeeper, that he had once thought about becoming a school teacher, but had loved the outdoor life too much to give it up. He was well-read, surprising her with his knowledge of literature and history, and he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh even in the midst of her troubles. For his part, Thomas seemed genuinely interested in everything about her, asking questions about her childhood, her dreams, her thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. It had been so long since Lena had someone to really talk to, someone who saw her as a person rather than just a problem to be solved or an obstacle to be overcome, that she found herself opening up to him in ways she had not anticipated. One evening, they were sitting by the small creek that ran through the eastern edge of her property, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The air was finally starting to cool as summer began its slow transition toward fall, and there was a peacefulness to the moment that made Lena wish she could freeze time, could hold on to this feeling forever. "Can I tell you something?" Thomas asked, his voice quiet. "Of course," Lena said. "When I first rode up to your place, I was not really looking for work," he admitted. "I mean, I needed work, that part was true, but I had heard about you in town, about a woman trying to hold onto her ranch against men who wanted to take it, and something about that just got under my skin. I could not ride away without at least offering to help." "Why?" Lena asked, turning to look at him. Thomas met her eyes, and there was something vulnerable in his expression, something open and honest that made her chest tighten. "Because I could not help my own father," he said. "Because I was just a kid when they came for us, and I could not stop them. I've been carrying that around for years, that feeling of being helpless, of failing someone I loved. When I heard about you, I thought maybe this was a chance to make up for that. Maybe I could help you when I could not help him." Lena reached out without thinking and took his hand. His skin was warm and calloused from work, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that belied his strength. "You are not responsible for what happened to your father," she said softly. "You were just a boy. You could not have stopped men with guns." "I know that in my head," Thomas said, "but my heart is a different matter. I think part of me has been looking for a way to make peace with what happened, to prove to myself that good people do not always lose, that sometimes the people who deserve to win actually do." "And what if I lose?" Lena asked. "What if Porter and his friends take my land anyway?" "Then at least you will have fought," Thomas said, "and you will not have fought alone. That has to count for something." They sat there by the creek as the light faded, their hands still clasped together, and Lena felt something shift inside her. This was more than just attraction, more than just gratitude for his help. She was falling for this man, for his kindness and his courage, and the way he looked at her like she was something precious and worth protecting. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. "Thomas," she said softly, and he turned to look at her. The world seemed to hold its breath as they gazed at each other, and then he was leaning in and she was meeting him halfway, and their lips came together in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and there was a light in Thomas's eyes that made Lena's heart soar. "I have been wanting to do that since the first day I met you," he admitted, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then why did you wait so long?" Lena asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Because I wanted to make sure you felt the same way," Thomas said. "Because you have enough to deal with without me adding complications. But I cannot pretend anymore, Lena. I care about you. More than I should, probably, given that we have only known each other a few weeks, but I cannot help how I feel." "I care about you too," Lena said, the admission feeling both terrifying and liberating. I did not think I had room in my life for anything beyond trying to save my ranch. But you changed that. You made me remember that there is more to life than just fighting and surviving." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally made their way back to the house in the gathering darkness, Lena felt like she was walking on air. For the first time since her father's death, she felt truly happy, felt like maybe the future held something beyond just struggle and loss. But her happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, trouble arrived in the form of 4 armed men who rode onto her property just after dawn. Thomas saw them first and came running to the house, his face grim. "Get your rifle," he said to Lena. "We have company." Lena grabbed her father's Winchester and followed Thomas outside. Charlie and Fred were emerging from the bunkhouse, both armed as well. The 4 riders approached slowly, spreading out in a way that suggested they knew what they were doing. "That is far enough," Thomas called out when they were about 20 yards away. "State your business." One of the men, a tall fellow with a scar across his cheek, grinned unpleasantly. "We are here with a message from Mr. Porter. He's tired of waiting for Miss Zimmerman to see reason. He's giving her one last chance to take his offer. If she does not, we have been authorized to remove her from the property by whatever means necessary." "This is her property, legally deeded to her by her father," Thomas said, his voice hard. "You have no right to remove her." "The law says different," the scarred man said. "Mr. Porter has a court order giving him the right to take possession pending the resolution of the dispute over the will. So the lady can either leave peacefully or we can make her leave. Your choice." "That is a lie," Lena said, stepping forward. "There is no court order. Judge Morrison is dead, and no other judge has ruled on this matter." The scarred man shrugged. "Take it up with the courts if you want, but we have our orders, and we are going to follow them." "Over my dead body," Thomas said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made the 4 riders exchange glances. "Listen, Cowboy, you do not want to make this personal," the scarred man said. "We are just doing a job. No need for anyone to get hurt." "Then I suggest you turn around and ride back to whoever hired you," Thomas said, "because we are not leaving, and we are not going to let you intimidate us." For a long moment, the 2 groups faced off, the tension so thick Lena could barely breathe. Then, one of the other riders, a younger man who looked nervous, said, "Maybe we should come back with more men." The scarred man glared at him, but must have decided discretion was the better part of valor. "Fine," he said, "but you are making a mistake, all of you. Mr. Porter does not take kindly to people who get in his way." They turned their horses and rode off, but there was no mistaking the threat in the scarred man's words. This was not over. This was just the beginning. "We need help," Thomas said as soon as the riders were out of sight. 4 against 4 is not good odds, and they are going to come back with more men." "Who can we get?" Lena asked, trying to keep the despair out of her voice. "Marshal Dawson will not help. Most of the people in town are too scared of Porter to stand up to him." "What about other ranchers?" Thomas asked. "Are there any who might be sympathetic?" Lena thought about it. "Maybe," she said slowly. "There's a man named Jacob Winters who has a place about 10 miles south. He's always been fair to me, and I know he has had his own troubles with Porter trying to buy him out. He might be willing to help." "Then let us go talk to him," Thomas said. "Charlie, Fred, you 2 keep watch here. Anyone shows up, fire 2 shots and we will come running." The ride to Jacob Winters' ranch took the better part of 2 hours, and Lena spent the time worrying about what they would find when they got back. But she knew Thomas was right. They needed help, and Winters was their best option. Jacob Winters was in his 50s, a weathered man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened as Lena explained the situation, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "I've been waiting for Porter to try something like this," he said when she finished. "He's been buying up land all over the county, using whatever methods he has to. I've managed to hold him off so far, but I know my turn is coming." "Will you help us?" Lena asked. Winters considered. "If I do, I am making an enemy of Porter. That is not something to take lightly." "I understand," Lena said. "But if we all stand together, maybe we can stop him. If we let him pick us off one by one, none of us will have a chance." Winters nodded slowly. "You are right about that." He stood up. "All right, Miss Zimmerman, I will help you. I can bring 3 of my men. That should even the odds a bit." "Thank you," Lena said, relief washing over her. "Thank you so much." They returned to Lena's ranch with Winters and his men and immediately began preparing for another attack. Thomas organized everyone, setting up positions that would give them the best defensive advantage. He moved with a confidence that suggested this was not the first time he had prepared for a fight, and Lena found herself grateful beyond words that he had ridden into her life when he did. As evening fell, they took up their positions and waited. The night was clear and cool, with a half moon providing enough light to see by. Lena was positioned in the house, her rifle resting on the windowsill, while Thomas was in the barn with two of Winters's men. Charlie and Fred were in the bunkhouse, and Winters himself was hidden near the main gate with his third man. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lena's nerves were stretched taut, every sound making her jump. But as the night wore on, and nothing happened, she began to think that maybe the show of force had been enough, that maybe Porter's men had decided it was not worth the risk. She was wrong. Just after midnight, she heard the sound of horses approaching, many of them. She counted at least 8 riders, maybe more, moving toward the ranch from multiple directions. Her heart hammering, she fired 2 shots into the air, the prearranged signal that trouble had arrived. The response was immediate. Thomas and the others opened fire from their positions, aiming high at first, warning shots meant to drive the attackers back. But Porter's men were not so easily deterred. They dismounted and took cover, returning fire. The next few minutes were chaos. The sound of gunfire echoed across the prairie, punctuated by the shouts of men and the whinnying of frightened horses. Lena fired carefully, trying to remember everything her father had taught her about shooting, about staying calm under pressure. She saw one of the attackers fall, clutching his leg, and felt a sick mixture of satisfaction and horror. Then, she saw something that made her blood run cold. 2 of the attackers had made it to the barn and were setting fire to the hay near the entrance. Flames began to lick up the wooden walls, and she knew that if the barn burned, they would lose not just the building, but the horses inside. Without thinking, she ran from the house, ignoring Thomas's shout of warning. She had a bucket in her hand, though she knew it would not be nearly enough to fight the fire. But she had to try. She could not let everything her father had built burn to the ground. She was halfway to the barn when one of the attackers stepped out of the shadows, his gun leveled at her chest. Time seemed to slow down. She saw his finger tightening on the trigger, saw the cruel smile on his face. And then Thomas was there, slamming into the man from the side, knocking him to the ground. The 2 men struggled, rolling in the dirt, and then there was a gunshot, and everything went still. Thomas stood up slowly, and Lena saw blood on his shirt. For a horrible moment, she thought he had been shot, but then she realized the blood was not his. The other man lay still on the ground, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. "Thomas," Lena breathed, but before she could say anything else, there was a shout from near the gate. "Hold your fire!" a voice called out. "Marshal's office! Everyone hold your fire!" Marshal Dawson rode into the yard with 2 deputies, and the shooting stopped. The remaining attackers who were still able to move tried to slip away into the darkness, but Winters and his men had them surrounded. "What in the hell's going on here?" Dawson demanded, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "These men attacked my property," Lena said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and anger. "They were hired by Samuel Porter to drive me off my land." "That's a serious accusation," Dawson said. "And I can prove it," said one of the captured men, surprising everyone. He was holding his wounded arm and looked pale and scared. "Porter hired us, said there would be no trouble, that we were just supposed to scare off a woman. He did not say nothing about getting into a gunfight." Dawson looked at the man sharply. "You are willing to testify to that?" "I am willing to tell the truth," the man said. "I got shot for $5 a day. That does not buy my loyalty." The fire in the barn was quickly put out before it could do serious damage, and Dawson rounded up all of Porter's men. Several were wounded, 1 was dead, but none of Lena's defenders had been seriously hurt. It felt like a miracle. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Dawson prepared to take his prisoners back to town. "I will be having a conversation with Mr. Porter," he said to Lena. "If what these men say is true, he will be facing serious charges." "Make sure you also talk to Edmund Cross and Harrison Webb," Lena said. "They were part of this too, trying to steal the documents that proved my father's will was legitimate." Dawson nodded grimly. "I will look into all of it. I am sorry, Miss Zimmerman. I should have taken your concerns more seriously from the start." "Yes, you should have," Lena said, but she was too tired to be angry. She just wanted this nightmare to be over. After Dawson and his prisoners were gone, Jacob Winters approached Lena. "You did good tonight," he said. "Took courage to stand up to men like that." "I could not have done it without help," Lena said, glancing at Thomas, who was leaning against the barn, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "That young man of yours is something special," Winters said with a knowing smile. "You hold on to him." "I plan to," Lena said softly. Winters and his men left, and Charlie and Fred went to catch up on the sleep they had missed. That left Lena and Thomas alone in the morning light, standing in the yard that had so recently been a battlefield. "You saved my life," Lena said, walking over to him. "That man would have shot me if you had not stopped him." "I could not let that happen," Thomas said simply. "I could not lose you, Lena, not when I just found you." Tears filled her eyes, tears of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. "I was so scared," she admitted. "When I saw you fighting with that man, when I heard the gunshot, I thought I might lose you. And I realized that you have become everything to me, Thomas. This land, this ranch, none of it matters if you are not here with me." Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and she could feel his heart beating against her cheek. "You are not going to lose me," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. If you will have me, I want to stay here with you, help you build this ranch into something great. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you." "Lena Zimmerman." She pulled back to look up at him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Is that a proposal, Thomas Tanner?" "I suppose it is," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know I do not have much to offer except my labor and my loyalty. But I love you, Lena. I think I have loved you since the moment I first saw you sitting on that horse, all proud and fierce and refusing to back down. So yes, I am asking you to marry me. Will you?" "Yes," Lena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I will marry you." He kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss that sealed the promise they had made to each other. When they finally broke apart, the sun was fully up, bathing the ranch in golden light. It felt like a new beginning, like all the darkness of the night had been burned away, leaving only hope and possibility. The next few weeks were busy ones. Marshal Dawson made good on his promise to investigate, and the evidence against Samuel Porter was overwhelming. Not only did several of his hired men testify against him, but a search of Edmund Cross's office turned up the missing documents related to Lena's father's will. Cross had hidden them in his desk, planning to destroy them once Porter had taken control of the land. With that evidence restored, there was no question about the legitimacy of Lena's inheritance. Porter, Cross, and Harrison Webb were all arrested and charged with conspiracy to defraud. The trial was quick, and all three men were convicted. Porter was sentenced to 5 years in prison, while Cross lost his law license and Webb lost his position at the bank. The story made headlines not just in Brownsville, but throughout Texas, a rare case of powerful men being held accountable for their crimes against someone weaker. Arthur McCallum ran a series of articles about the case, including a long piece about Lena and her fight to hold onto her land. The articles brought attention to the broader issue of women's property rights and inspired several other women in similar situations to stand up for themselves. Lena found herself the subject of both admiration and criticism. Some praised her courage, while others said she was setting a dangerous example, that she was stepping outside the proper role of women. But Lena did not care what the critics said. She had proven that a woman could stand up for herself and win, and that was all that mattered. Thomas and Lena were married in October in a simple ceremony at the ranch with only their closest friends in attendance. Margaret Sullivan came, as did Jacob Winters and his wife. Charlie and Fred stood up as witnesses, both of them grinning from ear to ear. Arthur McCallum was there too, documenting the event for his newspaper. Lena wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk for all these years. It fit her perfectly, the white lace glowing against her sun-kissed skin. Thomas wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes shining with love as he watched her walk toward him. The vows they exchanged were simple but heartfelt. They promised to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever challenges life might bring, to build a future based on trust and respect and partnership. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance wiped tears from their eyes. The celebration afterward was joyful, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Lena had never been happier. She danced with her husband under the stars, held close in his arms, and felt like all the pain and struggle of the past months had been worth it to bring her to this moment. That night, alone in the house that was now truly theirs, Thomas carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made her laugh with delight. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "I'm the luckiest man alive," he said softly, "to have found you, to have earned your love. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Lena said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Thomas. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They made love for the first time that night, a tender and passionate joining that left them both breathless and complete. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds drifting through the open window. "What are you thinking about?" Lena asked, tracing patterns on Thomas's chest with her fingertips. "I am thinking about the future," Thomas said, "about all the things we are going to do together. I want to expand the herd, maybe add some breeding stock. I want to build you a bigger house, something with a real parlor where you can entertain guests. I want to fill that house with children, little girls who are as fierce and brave as their mother, little boys who know how to work hard and stand up for what is right." "That sounds like a wonderful future," Lena murmured, her eyes growing heavy. "I cannot wait to live it with you." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in months, Lena slept without nightmares, without fear. She was safe, she was loved, and she was home. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a modest operation into one of the more successful spreads in the region. Thomas proved to be as good a businessman as he was a rancher, always looking for ways to improve their stock and increase their profits. But he never lost sight of what was truly important, never let work come before his family. Their first child was born in the fall of 1879, a healthy baby boy they named Jacob, after the friend who had stood by them in their hour of need. Thomas was overcome with emotion when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he marveled at the tiny, perfect life they had created together. "He is beautiful," he whispered to Lena, who was exhausted but radiant after hours of labor. "You are amazing. I do not know how you did that." "Women have been doing it since the beginning of time," Lena said with a tired smile, "but I have to admit, it is harder than breaking a horse." Thomas laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You can do anything," he said. "I have always known that." Jacob was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. And then, 3 years after that, came another son, Samuel, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his boisterous older siblings. The house that Thomas had dreamed of building became a reality. A large, comfortable home with a wraparound porch and a parlor where Lena hosted gatherings for the community. She became known not just as a rancher, but as a leader in the area, someone people came to for advice and support. She used her position to advocate for other women, helping several widows and single women secure their own property rights. The fight she had won became a beacon for others, proof that change was possible if people were willing to stand up for what was right. Thomas was her partner in everything, always supporting her endeavors even when others questioned whether a woman should be so publicly involved in business and politics. He was a devoted father, spending hours teaching his children to ride and rope, to read and write, to understand the value of hard work and integrity. He never forgot where he'd come from, never forgot the lessons his own father had tried to teach him before he was taken too soon. Charlie and Fred both lived to see their 80s, remaining on the ranch as honored members of the family until the end. When each passed away, they were buried on the hill next to Lena's father, and the whole community came out to pay their respects to the men who had been part of the ranch's history. Jacob Winters became a lifelong friend, his own ranch thriving alongside theirs. The two families often gathered for holidays and celebrations, their children growing up together like cousins. Margaret Sullivan remained a close confidant to Lena, a reminder of the women who had stood by her when times were hard. As for Samuel Porter, he served his full sentence and left Texas upon his release, broken and bitter. Edmund Cross drifted from town to town, never able to rebuild his reputation. Harrison Webb lost everything in bad investments and died penniless. Their falls from grace were complete, a testament to the fact that sometimes justice does prevail. The ranch continued to grow and prosper over the decades. Thomas and Lena weathered droughts and floods, economic downturns, and the changing times that came with the turn of the century. They adapted when they needed to, held firm to their values when others suggested compromise. They built something that lasted, something that mattered. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Lena back to the spot by the creek where they had first kissed all those years ago. The land had not changed much, still harsh and beautiful, still demanding respect and giving back in equal measure. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked, holding her hand as they watched the sunset. "All the struggle, all the hardship? Do you ever wish you had just taken the money and started over somewhere easier?" "Never," Lena said without hesitation. "This is where I belong. This is where we belong. Everything we went through, every challenge we faced, it made us stronger. It brought us together. I would not change a single thing." Thomas pulled her close, and they stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth living. Their love had started in conflict, forged in fire and struggle, but it had grown into something enduring and beautiful, as much a part of the landscape as the mesquite trees and the endless Texas sky. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They celebrated their children's weddings, held their grandchildren in their arms, and marveled at how quickly time seemed to move. Jacob became a rancher like his father, taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations as Thomas and Lena grew older. Rose married a doctor and moved to San Antonio but visited often with her family. Samuel surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, determined to use the law to protect people rather than exploit them. In the spring of 1910, Thomas and Lena celebrated their 32nd anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. But their love had not diminished with time. If anything, it had deepened, become something richer and more profound than the passionate romance of their youth. They still worked the ranch together, though Jacob did most of the heavy lifting now. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, and talking about everything and nothing. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and pleasure in the familiar touch of the person they loved most in the world. One evening, as they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Thomas turned to Lena with a look of such love and contentment that it took her breath away. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Lena asked. "For everything," Thomas said. "For being brave enough to fight for what was yours. For taking a chance on a drifter who showed up at your door offering to help, for building this life with me. I never imagined I could be this happy, Lena. I never imagined I could have all of this." "We built it together," Lena said, taking his hand, "every bit of it, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They kissed, a gentle, loving kiss that spoke of decades of partnership and devotion. Around them, their grandchildren played, their son worked in the barn, and the land they had fought so hard to keep stretched out in all directions, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they refused to give up, when they stood together against the world. The ranch that Lena's father had built and that she had defended continued to thrive for generations. It became known throughout Texas as a model of good ranching practices and family values, a place where hard work was honored and everyone, regardless of gender, was given the opportunity to prove themselves. The story of Lena and Thomas became part of local legend, told and retold as an example of courage, love, and determination. And on quiet evenings, when the sunset painted the Texas sky in brilliant colors and the wind whispered through the mesquite trees, you could almost imagine you saw them still, sitting together on that porch, holding hands and watching over the land they loved, the land they had fought for and won together.